The wind howled across the wide white prairie, carrying the sound of winter's teeth as though the land itself were gnashing. Snow fell so thick it seemed the sky had collapsed, erasing horizon and trail alike. And there, against the storm's fury, stood a lone ranch house, dark would press against the elements, smoke curling weakly from its chimney. Inside, the fire crackled, holding back the world's cold. Some men built their lives on solitude, stacking silence like lumber until their homes became vaults and their hearts iron-locked. Ezekiel Boone was such a man, and he believed nothing could break through. He didn't know mercy had already begun its walk toward him, wearing ragged shoes and carrying a baby in her arms. Ezekiel was not cruel by nature, only worn down. His ranch ran clean, his cattle were tended, his fences straight. Each board on his porch bore the weight of his stubbornness. Folks in town called him steady but distant, a man who answered questions with grunts, who tipped his hat but never lingered. Years ago, someone had broken his trust. Whether wife, family, or fate, he never said, and it bricked up the space inside him where laughter once lived. His table sat long enough for a family, but held only one plate. His Bible gathered dust on the shelf. His rocking chair faced a wall instead of fire. He thought he needed no one. That night, the knock came like a ghost, so faint he might have believed it was the storm itself tapping. When he opened the door, the sight near stole his breath. A woman, her face pale beneath strands of hair tangled with snow, clutched a bundle to her chest. The child inside whimpered, a sound thin but desperate. Her eyes lifted to his, wide with fear and pleading. "I'll work," she whispered, her voice cracking against the cold. "I'll cook, clean anything. Just let us stay until morning." Ezekiel's jaw tightened. He had no place for strays, no desire to take on burdens. He muttered, harsh enough to cut through her hope, "Ain't no room here." She blinked once, twice, shame coloring her face more deeply than the cold. She turned back into the blizzard, her thin shawl catching the wind. Ezekiel shut the door with more force than he meant. His fire snapped, his walls held, but the silence that returned was not the peace he once prized. It was heavier, almost accusing. Then came the sound, a baby's cry, muffled but sharp, carried through the storm and into his very bones. Ezekiel froze, hand on the table. He had told himself he didn't need the world, but what kind of man ignored a child's cry in the night? He cursed under his breath, threw open the door and called into the snow, "Damn it, come inside." The woman staggered back, tears streaking her already wet cheeks. She clutched the baby tighter as she crossed the threshold, collapsing near the fire. He shut the door against the storm, but something else came in with her, something he couldn't name, something warm that unsettled him. By morning, the town already knew. Word traveled faster than a horse in a storm. The cold-hearted rancher had taken in a widow with a babe. At the inn, Nora Field smirked into her coffee. Didn't need a wife all these years, but one snowstorm in Ezekiel Boone's house is full. The sheriff, Amos Yates, grunted that trouble follows strays and advised Ezekiel to be careful. Miriam Carter, for that was the woman's name, felt every eye upon her when she rode into town for flour. She held her baby tighter, her cheeks burning at the whispers. One small kindness met her there. Eli Harper, the storekeeper, slipped her an extra loaf of bread without charge. He only said, "Storms pass, miss. Don't mind tongues." It was the first time she'd smiled since the snow. Back at the ranch, Miriam set about proving her worth, not with words but with her hands. She fixed the stove's crooked hinge so it shut clean. She cooked meals that tasted not only of salt and fat, but of memory. Stew that reminded Ezekiel of younger days when food was shared, not merely consumed. She sang softly as she rocked Samuel to sleep, her voice wrapping the house in a warmth that the fire alone could not give. Ezekiel noticed, though he told himself he didn't. What he did notice was the silence fading, replaced by a hum, a rhythm that felt almost like life returning to his walls. One afternoon, Ezekiel took her out to the fence line, showing her how to tie wire, how to test for slack. She listened, her brow furrowed in determination, and her hands, delicate yet firm, learned quicker than he expected. When she glanced up and thanked him, her smile stayed longer than it should have. He found himself watching her more than the cattle. At night, When Samuel stirred, Ezekiel found his boots on before he thought, checking to make sure the child's breaths came easy. Each act, small and quiet, chipped away at the fortress he had built around his heart. The real test came when the baby fell ill. Samuel's body burned with fever, his tiny chest heaving, his cries weak and ragged. Miriam, frantic, clutched her child and begged Ezekiel with tears streaking down her face, "Don't let him die." Without pause, Ezekiel saddled his horse and plunged into the storm. Snow lashed his eyes, wind bit through his coat, but he pressed on, spurred by a need he could not deny. By the time he crashed through the doctor's door in town, his lips were blue, his fingers stiff, but his voice carried urgency enough to silence the room. Medicine for the boy. The townsfolk stared as if they'd never seen him before. Not the cold rancher, but a man aflame with desperate purpose. When he returned, frost clinging to his beard, Miriam wept into his hands as the fever finally broke and Samuel's breath steadied. Her tears fell warm against his weathered skin, and in that moment, without a single word spoken, something passed between them. Ezekiel knew, deep down, that his life had turned a corner he could never walk back from. He had chosen them, woman and child, as surely as if he'd sworn it aloud. The prairie keeps memories of storms and quiet acts of mercy. Gunshots fade and boasts turn to dust, but kindness leaves its mark on the wind. Ezekiel Boone had told himself he didn't need love, didn't need a wife, didn't need the world. Yet love had found him anyway, in the cry of a baby, in the strength of a weary woman. In the night, he risked everything for more than himself. And so it was that a rancher who needed no cook found instead of family, and with them, the fire inside his home burned brighter than the storm could ever put out.